Welcome, everyone. Many people want to speak English. They study grammar. They learn new words. They watch videos and read books. But still, when the moment comes to speak, something strange happens. The mind becomes quiet. Words disappear. Ideas are there, but the mouth does not move easily. This experience is very common. Many learners understand English quite well. They can read articles. They can watch videos. They can listen to podcasts. But speaking feels very different. Why does this happen? Why can the brain understand a language but still struggle to speak it? To understand this question, it is useful to think about how the brain learns languages. Learning a language is not only about knowledge, it is also about habits. The brain needs to build many small connections. These connections help us move from thinking to speaking. When people first learn a language, they usually focus on information. They memorize vocabulary. They study grammar rules. They complete exercises. This type of learning is useful. But speaking requires a different kind of learning. Speaking is a physical and mental action at the same time. The brain must choose words quickly. The mouth must pronounce them. The mind must organize ideas while speaking. This process is very dynamic, and the brain becomes better at this only through repeated use. In simple words, the brain learns to speak by speaking. At the beginning, the brain works slowly. It tries to translate from the native language. It searches for the correct grammar. It checks pronunciation. All these processes take time. So speaking may feel slow or uncomfortable. But something interesting happens with practice. The brain begins to create patterns. Patterns are mental shortcuts. When the brain sees the same structure many times, it starts to remember it automatically. For example, simple expressions become easier with repetition. People often say, "I think," "I believe," "in my opinion," "it depends." At first, these phrases may feel difficult, but after hearing and using them many times, the brain remembers them easily. They become natural patterns. Patterns are very important in language learning. The brain likes patterns. Patterns reduce effort. When the brain recognizes a pattern, it does not need to build every sentence from the beginning. It simply follows a familiar structure. Children learn language in this way. They hear patterns again and again. Slowly, these patterns become part of their natural speech. Adults can learn in a similar way. But adults often try to control language too much. They want every sentence to be perfect. They worry about mistakes. And this worry creates tension. When the brain feels tension, it becomes slower. It begins to monitor every word. This makes speaking more difficult. Psychology explains this effect quite clearly. When people feel pressure, the brain activates systems related to caution and control. These systems are useful in some situations, but they are not very helpful for spontaneous speech. Speaking a language requires a relaxed mind. Not a careless mind, but a relaxed one. When the mind feels safe, it becomes more flexible. Words come more easily. Ideas move more freely. This is why many learners speak better when they are relaxed. For example, some people speak more easily when talking with friends. They do not worry about mistakes. They simply communicate. And communication becomes more natural. Another important aspect of language learning is listening. Listening is often underestimated. But listening is one of the main ways the brain builds language patterns. When people listen regularly, The brain absorbs rhythm and structure. It learns how sentences flow. It becomes familiar with common expressions. Slow listening can be especially helpful. When speech is calm and clear, the brain has time to follow every idea. It can notice how words connect. It can understand the natural rhythm of the language. Over time, this rhythm becomes internal. The learner begins to feel how English moves, not only how it looks on paper, but how it sounds. This is very important for speaking. Speaking is closely connected to sound. If the brain knows the sound of a sentence, it can reproduce it more easily. Another interesting aspect of the brain is something called neural pathways. A neural pathway is simply a connection between neurons. Every time we repeat an action, these connections become stronger. This happens when learning music. It happens when learning sports. And it also happens when learning languages. At first, the pathway is weak. The brain must work hard. But with repetition, the pathway becomes stronger. The action becomes easier. This is why small daily practice is powerful. The brain does not need long hours of study every day. What it needs is regular contact with the language. Even 10 or 15 minutes of speaking practice can help. But consistency is very important. The brain learns through repetition across time. Another challenge for many learners is the habit of translating. Translation is natural at the beginning. The brain tries to connect the new language with the familiar one. But if translation continues for too long, it can slow down speech. The brain must move through two languages before producing a sentence. This creates delay. One useful habit is thinking in simple English. This does not mean using complex sentences. It simply means allowing the mind to form ideas directly in English. For example, simple observations during the day, small thoughts, short descriptions. The brain slowly becomes comfortable thinking in the new language. Another useful habit is speaking out loud. Many learners read silently. They watch videos quietly. But the muscles used in speech need practice too. Speaking activates different parts of the brain. When people speak out loud, the brain coordinates breathing, sound, and articulation. This physical practice is very important. Even simple sentences can help. Short reflections, small explanations, descriptions of everyday situations. Over time, the brain becomes more confident with sound production. Confidence is another important factor in language learning. Confidence does not mean believing that we are perfect. It simply means accepting that mistakes are part of learning. Mistakes are signals. They show where the brain is still learning. In language learning, mistakes are normal. Even advanced speakers make mistakes sometimes. But communication still happens. And communication is the real purpose of language. Modern life sometimes creates another difficulty for learners. People consume large amounts of information. They watch many videos. They read many articles. But speaking practice may remain limited. The brain becomes good at understanding. But it has fewer opportunities to produce language. Production and understanding are related, but they are not identical skills. The brain must practice both. This is why balanced learning is helpful. Listening, reading, speaking, and thinking. All these activities help the brain build stronger language networks. Another interesting idea from psychology is the concept of cognitive load. Cognitive load refers to the amount of information the brain processes at one time. When learning a language, the cognitive load can be high. The brain must remember vocabulary, apply grammar, think about pronunciation, and organize ideas. All this can feel heavy. But with practice, some processes become automatic. When something becomes automatic, it requires less mental effort. For example, common phrases become easy. Pronunciation improves. Sentence structures become familiar. The cognitive load becomes lighter. This allows the brain to focus more on meaning. Meaning is the true goal of language. When people communicate, they are sharing thoughts and experiences. They are not only producing correct sentences, they are expressing ideas. This perspective can help reduce pressure. Instead of asking, "Is my grammar perfect?" it can be useful to ask, "Did I communicate my idea?" Language becomes more natural when communication becomes the main goal. Another interesting aspect of language learning is patience. The brain changes slowly. Neural connections need time to grow stronger. Sometimes learners expect fast results. They may feel frustrated if progress seems slow. But language learning is not a straight line. Some days feel easier. Other days feel difficult. This variation is normal. The brain continues learning even when progress feels invisible. Small improvements accumulate over time. Listening regularly helps. Speaking regularly helps. Thinking regularly helps. All these small habits create long-term change. Another useful habit is noticing language patterns in real contexts. For example, when listening to conversations, or watching interviews, or hearing people explain ideas. Instead of focusing only on vocabulary, the brain can observe structures. How do speakers begin ideas? How do they express opinions? How do they explain reasons? These patterns appear again and again in natural speech. When learners notice these patterns, the brain begins to store them. Later, during speaking, these patterns can appear naturally. Language becomes less about constructing sentences from zero, and more about using familiar structures. Modern technology also offers many opportunities for language learning. People can listen to podcasts, watch videos, join online conversations, record their own voice. These tools allow learners to interact with the language regularly. But the most important element remains the same: consistency. The brain learns through repeated exposure. Even small daily contact can create meaningful change. Another psychological factor in language learning is attention. In modern life, attention is often divided. People move quickly between different tasks. They check phones. They read messages. They listen to short pieces of information. But deep learning often requires calm attention. When listening slowly and carefully, the brain absorbs more details. It notices pronunciation, sentence rhythm, word connections. This type of attention helps language patterns become clearer. In a calm environment, the mind processes information more deeply. This is why slow listening practice can be powerful. The brain has time to follow every sentence. It can reflect on meaning. It can recognize patterns. And gradually, these patterns become internal. Another useful idea is that language learning does not need to be perfect to be effective. Progress often comes from imperfect attempts. When learners speak, they experiment with language. Sometimes sentences are incomplete. Sometimes grammar is not perfect. But the brain still learns. Each attempt strengthens neural pathways. Each attempt improves fluency little by little. Over time, the brain becomes more flexible. It becomes easier to express ideas. Speaking becomes less stressful. Another helpful perspective is curiosity. Curiosity transforms learning into exploration. Instead of seeing language as a problem to solve, it becomes something to discover. New words become interesting. New expressions become useful tools. The brain becomes more engaged when curiosity is present. Curiosity activates attention and motivation, and these factors support learning. In many ways, training the brain to speak English is similar to training any other skill. Musicians practice scales. Athletes repeat movements. Writers write regularly. Language learners also benefit from repetition and gentle persistence. The brain adapts through experience. Every moment of listening, thinking, and speaking contributes to this adaptation. Sometimes progress is slow. Sometimes progress is surprising. But over time, the brain becomes more comfortable with the language. It begins to trust its own abilities. Words appear more quickly. Ideas flow more naturally. And speaking becomes less about effort and more about communication. In the end, training the brain to speak English is not only about language, it is also about understanding how learning works. The brain changes through repetition. It becomes stronger through practice, and it grows through patience. Perhaps the most important idea is very simple. The brain learns what it experiences regularly. If English becomes part of everyday life, even in small ways, the brain begins to treat it as something familiar, something normal, something natural. And when something becomes natural, speaking no longer feels like a difficult task. It simply becomes another way to express human thoughts, another way to share ideas, another way to connect with people. And sometimes, the quiet realization is this: the brain does not learn a language only by studying it. The brain learns a language by living with it.